Everyone thought the marriage would bring two great families together. Nobody imagined it would light a fire that no one in the palace could put out. Behind the golden doors of Thornevale, two women stood on opposite sides of a wall no one could see. One had raised a daughter to marry into power. The other already held that power in her hands and had no intention of sharing it. They smiled in front of the cameras. They bowed at the same events. But in the quiet halls, away from the crowd, something cold was already growing between them. What happened next was never meant to reach the public. Yet the truth has a way of slipping through even the thickest palace walls. This is the story of a mother who refused to bow, a queen who refused to bend, and the silent war that shook a kingdom from the inside. Adelicia Vane was not born into royalty, and she never pretended to be. She had built her family from nothing, brick by brick, choice by careful choice. Her greatest achievement was her daughter, Eleanor, a young woman with soft eyes and a spine of steel. So when Prince Tobias of Thornevale fell in love with Eleanor, Adelicia felt something she had chased her whole life finally land in her hands. Her daughter would be a princess. Her blood would sit beside the throne. But not everyone in the palace welcomed the news with open arms. Queen Rosalind, wife of the king and the most powerful woman in Thornevale, watched the engagement with a still and guarded face. She had spent decades earning her place. She had survived scandals, rivals, and cold winters of gossip. And now a merchant's daughter was walking into her world with a mother who did not seem to understand the rules. The first meeting between the two women was polite on the surface. They met in the Rose drawing room, a place chosen by the queen herself. Rosalind sat first, as tradition demanded, and offered Adelicia a chair slightly lower than her own. It was a small thing. Most people would not have noticed, but Adelicia noticed everything. She smiled and sat anyway. She spoke warmly about the wedding, about the joy of the young couple, about the future. Rosalind answered in short, measured words. Every sentence was correct. None of them were kind. By the time the tea grew cold, both women understood something without saying it aloud. This was not a friendship. This was a beginning of a quiet contest, and neither of them planned to lose. Eleanor, standing at the door, saw the tight smiles and felt her heart sink. She loved her mother. She respected the queen. And already she could feel herself being pulled between them like a rope in two strong hands. The wedding preparations should have been a season of joy. Instead, they became a battlefield fought with flowers, seating charts, and silence. Every decision turned into a test of power. When Adelicia suggested that Eleanor wear her late grandmother's veil, Queen Rosalind gently reminded the room that royal brides of Thornevale wore the crown veil kept in the palace vault. It was tradition, she said. It was expected. Adelicia did not argue in front of others. That was not her way. But later, in a private corner of the East Wing, she spoke to her daughter with a low and steady voice. "You are still my child," she said. "Do not let them erase where you come from." Eleanor nodded, but her heart felt heavy. She was learning that in this palace, even love came wrapped in rules. The staff began to notice the tension. Servants whispered in the kitchens. A lady-in-waiting mentioned to a friend that the queen had asked for Adelicia's name to be placed lower on the ceremony list than one might expect for the mother of the bride. Another said the two women had not spoken directly in over a week, choosing instead to send messages through assistants. Small insults grew into larger ones. When Adelicia hosted a small tea for the bridal party, the queen sent her regrets at the last moment, claiming a headache. When the queen arranged a grand fitting for Eleanor's gown, Adelicia arrived a full hour early and quietly changed the seating so that she sat closest to her daughter. Rosalind said nothing when she saw it. She simply smiled and moved a single chair back to its place, watching Adelicia's face as she did. It was a war without shouting. A war fought in glances, in delays, in the careful placement of a name or a chair. And caught in the middle stood Eleanor and Prince Tobias, two people who only wanted to be married, watching the women they loved most turn every kind gesture into a move on a hidden board. One evening, Tobias found Eleanor crying by the tall glass windows of the library. He held her hand and promised that once they were married, things would settle. He believed it. He wanted to believe it. But even as he spoke, he knew his mother, the queen, never forgot a slight, and Eleanor knew her own mother never backed down from a fight. The wedding was still weeks away, and the ground beneath them was already beginning to crack. The breaking point came on the night of the grand rehearsal dinner. The great hall of Thornevale glittered with candlelight, and the most important families of the kingdom filled every seat. It should have been a night of laughter. Instead, it became the night the hidden war finally showed its face. The trouble began with the toast. By long custom, the mother of the bride was to speak first, welcoming the two families as one. But when the moment came, a herald announced that the queen would open the evening with a blessing. Adelicia sat frozen, her glass in her hand, as Rosalind rose and spoke with grace to the entire hall. It was a masterstroke, elegant and impossible to protest. The queen had taken the mother's moment and made it look like an honor. Adelicia waited. She let the queen finish. Then, before the herald could move on, she stood on her own, uninvited, and lifted her glass. A hush fell over the hall. In a clear and warm voice, she thanked the kingdom for welcoming her daughter, and then she said something no one expected. She spoke of the women who build families without crowns, who raise children with love instead of titles, and who never forget the ones who stood beside them before the world was watching. The words were beautiful. They were also a spear aimed straight at the throne. Every guest understood. The queen's smile did not move, but her eyes turned to ice. Eleanor gripped her wine glass so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Later that night, the two women met alone in a side chamber, away from every servant and guest. For the first time, there were no polite masks. Rosalind spoke first, her voice low and sharp, telling Adelicia that she did not understand the world she was entering. Adelicia answered without fear, saying she understood it perfectly, and that she would not shrink so that others could feel tall. They stood face to face, two mothers, two forces, neither willing to give an inch. And in that small room, with candlelight flickering on the walls, the true cost of the coming marriage finally became clear to them both. Morning came, and with it a strange and heavy quiet. The palace staff moved on soft feet, sensing that something had shifted in the night. Word of the rehearsal toast had already traveled through every corridor. Some admired Adelicia's courage. Others feared what the queen might do in return. And through it all, Eleanor sat alone in her chambers, unwilling to choose a side, aching to keep both women in her life. It was Eleanor herself who finally moved to end the war. She was not loud like her mother, nor commanding like the queen. But she carried a quiet strength that both women had underestimated. She asked to meet them together in the very rose drawing room where the whole story had begun. This time, she arranged the chairs herself, all at the same height, facing one another as equals. She spoke plainly. She told them she loved them both, and that she would not spend her marriage being torn in half. She said the kingdom did not need two queens at war, but two women strong enough to stand together for the sake of the person they both claimed to love. Then she waited, her hands trembling but her voice steady. For a long moment, neither older woman spoke. Rosalind studied the young bride with new eyes, seeing in her a strength she had not expected from a merchant's daughter. Adelicia felt a quiet pride swell in her chest, watching her child stand tall in a room built to make her feel small. Slowly, carefully, the ice began to melt. It was not a warm friendship, and it never would be. But it became something workable, a truce built on respect rather than love. The queen offered a small nod. Adelicia offered a small smile. It was enough. The wedding, when it came, was radiant. The two women stood on either side of the young couple, and the kingdom saw only unity. But those who had watched closely knew the truth. A silent war had been fought behind those golden doors, and it had ended not with a victory, but with a daughter wise enough to teach two proud queens the value of peace. And in the quiet halls of Thornevale, that lesson would echo far longer than any crown.